Welcome on into the Cougar Tracks podcast powered by KSLSports.com. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Quick reaction to the latest college football playoff top 25 rankings. I wanted to lay this down. I'm inside the indoor practice facility. BYU football media availability got done just a little bit ago, but the Cougars tumble from number 6 to number 14 in the latest college football playoff top 25. And, my instant reaction to this fall is there is zero respect given to the Big 12 Conference. And it's a shame because the Big 12 Conference is a really good football league. There's 4 teams in this playoff top 25 that are from the Big 12 in the rankings, yet none of them are higher than number 14. BYU remains the highest ranked team from the Big 12 Conference, which would put BYU still in the playoff field if the season ended today. BYU would be the 12 seed. They would go on the road in the first round to play the Ohio State Buckeyes. So for a reward of a 9-1 season and a potential conference champion, if BYU was to win, their reward as of now would be playing the Buckeyes in Columbus. Pretty crazy. There's more respect given to Boise State than what BYU and teams in the Big 12 Conference are currently doing. It's quite surprising. Here's how the playoff top 25 shakes out. Number 1, Oregon, no surprise. Number 2, Ohio State. 3, Texas. 4, Penn State. 5, Indiana. 6, Notre Dame. They move up. 7, Alabama. They climb 3 spots from last week. 8, Miami. They jump up 1 spot. 9, Ole Miss. 10, Georgia. 11, Tennessee. They're the first team out. 12, Boise State, who's the number 4 seed because they're the 4th highest ranked conference champion. And then get this, number 13, SMU, and then 14, BYU. So, yes, the team that BYU beat in week 2, SMU, is ranked ahead now of BYU. Look, I understand that SMU's loss is better than BYU's loss to a 4-6 Kansas team, but the game happened, and Jennings played at quarterback for a majority of that game against BYU, and BYU still won that football game. Crazy stuff. Now, all of this gets torn down every single week, and the committee will have a new set of rankings next Tuesday night, so there's nothing to necessarily panic about because there's still opportunities in front of BYU to climb up the rankings, most notably this week. Number 21, Arizona State. BYU travels to Tempe this Saturday for a 1:30 kick. So that's another data point to, help BYU climb. But understand that if, say, BYU hypothetically dominated Arizona State, well, what happens? ASU completely falls out of the rankings. BYU would get, a slight bump, and then the narrative would be, well, Arizona State wasn't that good. We know how this works. So it's going to be really tricky for the Big 12 champ to leapfrog Boise State. And keep in mind, it was an interesting tidbit here. At the end of the college football playoff top 25 rankings at number 24, UNLV is there. So Boise, if they meet with the Rebels in the Mountain West Conference Championship game, that's going to be a top 25 data point that they can get at season's end to potentially maintain themselves in front of the potential Big 12 champion. So it's going to be really difficult for the Big 12 to get out of that first round. And I didn't think this would be much of a talking point for, the Big 12. I really thought there would be a lot more respect given to this league, but clearly not. The committee has spoken that they are not impressed with the Big 12, and most notably BYU. The close calls for BYU have happened. Yes, Oklahoma State, Utah, close calls. SMU even. But they've also had a handful of blowouts too, and when you're putting together these rankings, you got to take into account the full body of work. And Kansas has beat BYU. They beat Iowa State, 2 teams that are currently in this top 25. It's not like they're a complete slouch. Now, they're not a great football team, but they're not some complete deadbeat. I mean, Ole Miss, I think they lost to Kentucky, who's got 5 or 6 losses potentially. I'd have to go double check that, but a lot of teams have had some suspect moments or games where they didn't look their best. They needed close calls, yet they seem to get the benefit of the doubt. Teams in the Big 12 have no benefit of the doubt, and the margin for error is just not there. So you need style points if you're a team like BYU, if you're a team like Colorado. Now, the nice thing is that if you do win, you're most likely going to get into the playoff. But, I mean, is that even a guarantee? Number 19, Army, is sitting at 9-0. If they beat Notre Dame this week, what happens to the Black Knights at Army? Do they leapfrog potentially BYU? Or, I mean, that would be pretty hard to not give Army a huge bump if they knock off the number 6 team in the country at Yankee Stadium. Could we see a situation where the Big 12 champ is left out of the playoff completely? I don't think that's going to happen, but at this point, I don't think you can rule anything out with how this playoff committee is handling these rankings. When you look at the top of the rankings, too, it's interesting. You know, Oregon has a close game against a mediocre Wisconsin. No one bats an eye. No one even flinches. Again, everyone's had close calls. But why does no one bat an eye about Oregon? Yes, they got a 0 in the loss column, but why is there no questioning? Ohio State, they lost to Oregon. Are they clearly the number 2 team? Texas, number 3. Who have they beat? They struggled at times with Arkansas, and Arkansas was a team that lost to Oklahoma State. Penn State lost to Ohio State. I mean, we can go on and on. So it's really interesting to see how this shakes out, but I think what's great, though, about college football is that there's not a clear-cut number 1 best team that's just going to mow through the playoff this year. And it's the perfect year for a 12-team playoff to emerge because there are a lot of competitive football teams that could play at a high level on any given Saturday and win some games in this bracket. But the breakout of the bracket, you've got, let's see, Big Ten teams. You've got 4 from the Big Ten. From the SEC, you would have 4 as well. You'd have 1 FBS independent, that's Notre Dame. You'd have 1 ACC, 1 Mountain West, and 1 Big 12. I will say it would be kind of interesting. Now, it'd be a bear of a matchup, and to go into Columbus would be as difficult as it gets. But a 5-12 matchup, BYU and Ohio State, like BYU would probably be, I would guess, a 17 probably point underdog, maybe 20. I mean, you look at Ohio State and Indiana this week, the Buckeyes are a 13.5 point favorite, I believe. I bet BYU would probably be a 17 to 20 point underdog against the Buckeyes. However, if you somehow pulled off a miracle in the shoe, you would then play in the quarterfinals Boise State. Not the worst draw in the world potentially. Now, what was last week's setup would have been much better, where you're the 3 seed in the quarterfinals, and then you play either Ole Miss or Penn State. That setup would have been perfect. For the fan experience, though, going to the Horseshoe would be pretty cool. BYU has never played in Columbus in the Horseshoe. They've played Ohio State in Holiday Bowls and the Citrus Bowl back in 1985, but never in Provo or in Columbus. So for selfish reasons, I think that would be incredible to experience that and to see how BYU stacks up against a program that is always just kind of bulletproof. I mean, Ohio State is always elite. You know, Ohio State has never been a program that dips ever. I mean, their dip years were, John Cooper when they could rarely beat Michigan, and recently with Ryan Day when they couldn't beat Michigan. Like, those are the dip years, and that still consists of 10-2, 11-1. Ohio State's a machine, and to see how BYU would stack up against that would be honestly incredible, because it would be quite the measuring stick to really gauge where your program stacks up against the elite of the elite, and you could never play that narrative, oh, they didn't care to be there. You know, they were looking ahead to next season. They were playing their backups. Like, no, it's the playoff. Ohio State's on their home field. They would want that win to advance in the playoffs. So you couldn't play that card anymore, because that used to always be the thing in these big bowl games was, oh, well, that team didn't want to be there. They quit. They were not interested in the game. You know, that's always the angle. You can't say that in the playoff if you did get into it. But BYU's got a long road to go. I mean, you got to take care of business against Arizona State this week, and then you got to take care of business, too, against Houston. And who knows what you get out of Houston every single week. But, you know, ASU is going to be a tough game. You're an underdog in that game. And it's going to be a sold-out crowd. I bet there's going to be a ton of BYU fans coming up on Saturday afternoon in Tempe. But a lot of football left to be played. But one thing is clear, that this committee does not respect the Big 12. They don't at all. And that's a little bit worrisome going forward, that you're probably going to be placed in that first-round hole, and your reward, if you do get in as the Big 12 champ, is you're probably going to play the Buckeyes. So good luck. But that's the instant reaction to the third installment of the College Football Playoff Rankings. You can go see my write-up on KSLSports.com. Got a full piece up there on that, but I'm going to sign off now. You can go listen to my BYU Arizona State preview. Also, coming up a little bit later tonight, got my interview with an Arizona State insider breaking down the Sun Devils in depth, kind of get an insider behind the scenes look at what makes ASU go this season as the Sun Devils are off to an 8-2 start. So BYU, Arizona State coming up Saturday. Top 25 showdown in the playoff rankings. Going to be a lot of fun. I'll talk to you next time here on the Cougar Tracks podcast, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.